There's no great evidence that the US was that bothered about it either, that President Trump is that bothered about traditional trade deals. What does President Trump want? He wants to show he's a great deal maker, and he wants personal glory. He wants major golf tournaments at his golf course in Scotland or something, or, to show that he's doing something about the deficit.
Now, for our top story today, in an exclusive interview with The Times, one of President-elect Donald Trump's economic advisors, Stephen Moore, he says that the UK must decide who it wants to be trading partners with, the US free market or the European socialist model. Those are his words, not mine. Moore's warning comes after Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey urged the government to rebuild more trade relations with the European Union to repair some of the economic damage caused by Brexit. So, is international trade ever a binary choice? Would the Trump administration really reject a deal if it thought that the government was getting too cosy, so to speak, with the rest of Europe? I'm joined now by David Henig, Director of the UK Trade Policy Project and someone who worked with the UK government on US-UK trade around the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. David, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. I'd rather be talking about my favourite disco track, but let's give tariffs a go instead.
Well, I'll tell you what, David, you can give us your favourite disco track at the end and we'll play it out. But let's get stuck into this idea. Is trade binary? I.e., is the UK stuck in a position where it's going to have to choose whether to get closer with the EU or get closer with the US?
You'd be expecting me to say this, but really it isn't. I'm afraid we're going to be stuck with a few years of various of Trump's aides saying this sort of stuff. You've got to choose us or them. That's obviously their game that they want to play. That's not a game that the UK wants to play. We want to play the game of we want to trade with the EU. They are, after all, geographically our nearest partner. We want to trade with the US. They're also pretty important to us. And that's what our companies will do. And they'll be having to, work around whatever barriers President Trump puts in place. But I'm assuming that this is kind of loose talk at this stage. I'm not really taking it that seriously.
There's a lot of talk about a possible UK-US trade deal. Of course, this harks back to the Johnson administration post-Brexit. That's what everybody was looking for. That was everyone was hoping for. It didn't happen back then. David, what are the chances of it happening now in a second Trump presidency?
I think the chances of a UK-US trade deal right now, a traditional trade deal, are very low indeed. If it didn't happen under Boris Johnson, who really wanted it, why didn't it happen then? Well, actually, there's no great evidence that the US was that bothered about it either, that President Trump is that bothered about traditional trade deals. What does President Trump want? He wants to show he's a great deal maker, and he wants personal glory. He wants major golf tournaments at his golf course in Scotland or something, or, to show that he's doing something about the deficit. The UK doesn't, in fact, we have a pretty balanced trade relationship with the US. We've already heard as well, we've got farmers protesting in the UK. Those farmers aren't going to like it if the UK changes food rules to allow for certain US foods, the famous chlorinated chicken. That just doesn't seem to be a runner at all. Yeah, there could be deals between the UK and the US, but it won't be on that traditional model, I don't think. And we've also got to wait and see, yes, there are going to be Trump tariffs, that we are going to get caught up in it in some way, but I don't think it's going to be as kind of black and white as it's currently being painted, that everything will be tariffed for every country. I think it'll be a little bit more selective than that.
David, is there an opportunity here for the UK? You mentioned the tariffs, which was going to be where I was going to next with my questions, that a danger of the UK being trapped between the trade war that Donald Trump wants to create with China and with the EU. But should that be looked upon as an opportunity? We're no longer tied to the EU. Do we have an advantage of being able to actually nimbly arrange for a trade deal that actually benefits the UK, both in terms of dealing with the EU and with the US?
Well, in the first instance, I think that what we could do nimbly is try and stay out of it as much as possible, actually. We're trading fine with the US as it stands. We do want to remove some of the barriers with the EU, and we might be able to do that on various deals. The EU and the US are clearly going to lock horns. China and the US is going to lock horns, and China and the EU. We're not in that big power game anymore. What we've got to try and do is look after our interests as best they can. Call it nimble, or just call it, playing this one as smart as we can. And to be fair to the government, this is kind of what Rachel Reeves said in a big speech on Thursday. We believe in trade, and we want to trade with whoever will trade with us, and our companies want to trade. The City of London wants to trade. Scotch wants to sell their products around the world. So whether you call it nimble or just, the principle is, we're a trading nation, and that's what we want to try to do.
You mentioned farmers and, of course, the protests that are going on in Wales today and will continue throughout the weekend all across the country. What's the danger of a US-UK trade deal for the farming community? We spoke a lot when it was done about the New Zealand and the Australian trade deals that were done and the difficulties that they pose to UK farming. What are the dangers for UK farming when it comes to a US trade deal?
Look, the UK farm sector is pretty mixed. There's different communities. It was particularly the sheep farmers who were upset about the Australia deal, which allowed in more or less unlimited quantities of lamb. But also what our farming community want to be able to do is to sell to the EU. They're finding that that's increasingly difficult. That's why the Labour government's spoken about doing a deal on that. If the UK was to accept US farm produce, it probably isn't so much of an issue about the quantity of food that would come in from the US. It's more about the difficulty then that the UK would have in doing a deal with the EU. Therefore, that's exports lost potentially to UK farmers, or that they're not going to get back. It puts them in a more difficult economic situation. That's the danger, I think, to them, is that we want to be able to sell our produce around the world, and if we're changing our standards to satisfy the Americans, that makes it harder for us to do so. We want to have high standards and to be able to sell British food on the basis that it's produced to high standards.
David, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to chat to you.
Okay, cheers.
David Henig there, Director of a UK Trade Policy Project.